I wasn't supposed to be there. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I stood at the edge of the party, holding a drink that I barely noticed. I hadn't planned on attending. In fact, I wasn't even invited. But here I was, a quiet spectator in a room full of strangers. My name is Aaron, and up until that night, I was living a life I thought was ordinary. You know, the kind of life where everything seems in its place. I was married to Claire, a woman I'd been with for over 10 years. We lived in a small but cozy apartment, and we had routines. I'm a creature of habit. Simple things kept me grounded. Dinner at 7, bed by 11, weekends spent at the local park with our dog, Max. And yet, all of that felt like a distant memory as I watched Claire interact with a man I didn't recognize. This wasn't the first time I had felt a creeping unease about our marriage. A few months ago, Claire started acting a little differently. Small changes, nothing big enough to outright question her loyalty, but the shifts were noticeable. She'd become more withdrawn, spending longer hours at work, canceling plans at the last minute, her smile less genuine. I told myself it was just stress, work, life, kids. But deep down, I wondered if something more was at play. I didn't want to be that husband. You know the one. Always suspecting, always doubting. But then came the text messages. At first, I chalked it up to harmless communication. She was always on her phone, but she was a busy woman, after all. But one night, as I sat across from her at dinner, I saw the name on her phone screen. Lucas. She quickly shoved the phone aside, but I caught a glimpse. The conversation looked intimate. There was a familiarity in their words that made my stomach drop. I didn't say anything. I wanted to believe that it was nothing. But as time went on, the feeling only grew stronger. Something was off. So, when Claire mentioned a friend's gathering on a Friday night, I decided I needed to know more. It wasn't like Claire to casually go to a gathering without much detail, especially when she had been so secretive about the whole thing. I was supposed to stay home, watch a movie, maybe get some rest. But that night, for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt compelled to follow her. I didn't tell her. I didn't mention my doubts. I just slipped out after she left, not wanting her to see me. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I knew I had to find out for myself. The address Claire had given me was in an area I didn't recognize. It was a little outside the city, tucked away in a neighborhood with houses that seemed a little too big for people like us. It was dark by the time I arrived, and I sat in my car for a while, watching the house she had entered. There were no lights on in the windows, and I could hear faint music from inside. I didn't want to assume the worst, but everything in me screamed that I was right to be there. After what felt like hours, I saw her leave the house with a man I didn't know. They were laughing. Too much, too freely, as if there was no weight to their connection. She was holding her bag in one hand and a drink in the other, and he was standing a little too close, talking too closely in her ear. My heart sank. I told myself it was innocent. Maybe he was just a friend. Maybe I was overreacting. But I knew something was wrong. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity. The images of them together, the way she looked so at ease with him, kept replaying in my mind. This man, this Lucas, he wasn't just a friend. I could feel it in my bones. The front door of the house opened again, and I saw Claire and Lucas walk back inside, laughing once more. The scene felt almost surreal, like I was watching a movie, but I couldn't look away. That's when I decided I couldn't just be a passive observer anymore. I don't know how long I sat in the car after they went back inside. It felt like time had stretched into something infinite. Every minute that passed only made my anxiety worse, my thoughts racing a mile a minute. The rational part of my brain kept telling me to calm down, that maybe I was just overthinking things, that Claire was just being friendly with this guy. But there was a nagging feeling deep in my gut telling me I was wrong. I couldn't sit there anymore. Something in me snapped. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, but I had to see it for myself. Slowly, I got out of the car, trying to move as quietly as possible. My heart was pounding, my steps unsteady as I approached the front door of the house. There was a small front yard, lit only by a single porch light. I crept along the side, my eyes fixed on the darkened windows. I could still hear faint laughter from inside, but it wasn't just the sound that made me freeze. It was the unmistakable voice of Claire, followed by that laugh of hers, the one she only reserved for when she felt completely at ease, completely herself. But tonight, there was something different about it. It wasn't the carefree, familiar laugh I knew. It was flirtatious, almost inviting. I couldn't stop myself from moving closer. I reached a window at the back of the house, where the light was dim but enough to see through. And there they were, Claire and Lucas, standing way too close to each other. I could barely make out their conversation, but the way their bodies were angled toward one another, the way Lucas was looking at her, it wasn't just friendly banter. There was an intimacy in the way they interacted, a connection that felt far too deep for just a casual friendship. Claire's hand brushed his arm, and that's when my chest tightened. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I never imagined this. Never. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to burst through that door and demand answers. But my feet stayed rooted to the ground, my body frozen in place. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The shock of it all had left me paralyzed. A few moments later, Claire and Lucas disappeared from the window. The laughter died down, and the house grew silent. I had no idea what was going on inside, but I knew this wasn't just a friendly gathering. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just leave without knowing what was happening. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I stayed. I waited in the darkness, my heart still pounding in my chest. What was Claire doing with him? Was she cheating on me? The thought felt impossible, but as the minutes dragged on, I realized that I couldn't ignore what I had seen. Something had changed in her, and whatever it was, I wasn't a part of it anymore. I stood in the dark for what felt like hours. The stillness of the night seemed suffocating. It was as if the world had disappeared, and the only thing left was me, the house, and the question that loomed over everything. What the hell was going on in there? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But every fiber of my being told me that what I had seen wasn't just innocent. It was the kind of thing you couldn't explain away, no matter how hard you tried. The door of the house opened suddenly, and I froze. Someone stepped out, and it wasn't Claire or Lucas. It was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a jacket and looking like he had just come from some upscale event. He glanced around the yard, as if searching for something, and then started walking down the steps toward the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. I ducked behind a nearby bush, not sure whether I was being paranoid or just acting on instinct. Why was he leaving? And why didn't I recognize him? I thought about following him, but stopped myself. I had already stepped too far into this mess. I waited, barely breathing, until he was out of sight, and then I took a few cautious steps toward the house. The front door was still cracked open, and I could hear voices again, though they were muffled by the walls. But this time, there was something more. The tone of their conversation was more serious, more intense. Then, as I stood there listening, I heard it. A laugh, unmistakable, Claire's laugh. But it was different. It wasn't the playful sound I knew. It was the kind of laugh that came from a place of comfort, of shared intimacy, of something deeper than I'd ever heard before. I didn't know what to do with this new information. Was I supposed to confront her now? No, I couldn't. The last thing I wanted was to come off as controlling or to make her feel trapped. But how could I just ignore it? How could I walk away without knowing the truth? I felt a wave of anger rising inside me, but it wasn't just anger, it was hurt. Deep, gut-wrenching hurt. I thought I knew Claire better than anyone else. I thought I understood her, knew every little quirk and smile. But now I wasn't sure. Before I could decide on my next move, I heard the door open again. This time, it was Claire, stepping out onto the porch. She looked around, like she was checking for something. My heart raced, and I instinctively stepped back, trying to hide myself better. She didn't see me, but she saw someone else. Lucas. He stepped out behind her, and for a second, I could have sworn they were about to kiss. They were that close. Claire had her hand resting on his chest, and she said something to him, something too quiet for me to hear. Lucas leaned in, his hand brushing against her arm. Then he gave her a soft smile. Something inside me snapped. I didn't know what to do anymore. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to walk away, confront them, or just leave it all behind. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without understanding what was really going on. I watched as Claire and Lucas shared a few more words, and then, just as quickly as they appeared, they both walked back inside the house, leaving me standing there in the dark, unsure of what came next. I had to get inside. I had to find out what was happening between them. I couldn't just be the silent observer anymore. My mind was racing as I stood in the dark, struggling to calm my breathing. Every step, every movement felt like it was echoing through my skull. What was I doing here? Why did I need to know the truth? Was it worth it, even if it destroyed everything? But I couldn't stop myself. The curiosity, the need to know, It was consuming me. I felt like I had no choice but to push further, even though I had no idea what I would find. I had to know what was going on behind those walls, behind the facade Claire had been putting up for weeks. I crept closer to the house, trying not to make a sound. The light from the front door cast a long shadow, making it harder to stay hidden, but I pressed on. I wasn't sure if I was following my instincts or just my anger. It didn't matter, though. What mattered was finding answers. I finally reached the back door, which was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see a sliver of light spilling out. The conversation inside was louder now, more distinct, and I could hear Claire's voice clearly. She sounded different, more alive, more animated than I had heard her in weeks. And the other voice, Lucas' voice, it was so familiar now, so clear. They were too comfortable with each other. The kind of comfort I hadn't felt in a long time. I was shaking, but not from fear. I was angry, furious. I didn't know what exactly I expected to find, but it wasn't this. I took a deep breath and decided. I was going in. I pushed the door open just a little further, the sound of the hinges barely audible. I slipped inside, moving as quietly as possible. The house smelled like wine and expensive cologne, a sharp contrast to the simple, homey scent of our own place. I moved down the hallway, stopping just before I reached the living room. Through the crack in the door, I could see them. Claire and Lucas were sitting on the couch, facing each other, their knees touching. Claire's head was tilted slightly to the side as she laughed at something Lucas had said, her eyes glowing in a way I hadn't seen in months. There was no hesitation in her touch as she reached out and brushed her fingers against his arm. I saw how he leaned closer, his face just inches from hers. And then, in a moment that felt like a punch to the stomach, I saw it. He kissed her, softly, at first, but then with more intensity. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I felt like the world was spinning. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed about our marriage, was shattering right in front of me. I wanted to run, to scream, to break through the door and demand answers, but I stayed frozen. I couldn't look away. The kiss lasted longer than I could bear, but I couldn't stop myself from watching. It was as if I had been placed in a trance, unable to turn away. This was my wife, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had loved for years. And here she was, kissing another man in our living room, acting as if nothing had ever mattered between us. As they pulled away from the kiss, Claire smiled, her lips still flushed. She whispered something into Lucas' ear, and the way he responded made my blood boil. They were having an affair. They were in this together. I didn't know how long it had been going on, but the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe it. Why hadn't I seen it before? I was in the middle of processing the shock when Claire stood up. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to remain hidden, my heart pounding in my chest. She walked toward the kitchen, and I held my breath, praying she wouldn't hear me. Lucas, however, didn't follow her. Instead, he stood up, pacing slightly, and then turned toward the window. I could tell he was waiting for something. Waiting for her to come back, for her to make the next move. But then something strange happened. Something that, in that moment, I couldn't understand. A second man walked into the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a presence that was impossible to ignore. He was dressed sharply, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Lucas. I saw the briefest of glances shared between them, a look that felt knowing. I didn't know what to think. Who was this guy? What was going on? I barely had time to process everything before the second man spoke. "You didn't tell him, did you?" he asked, his voice low, almost predatory. I felt my heart stop. The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could barely breathe as I stood there, frozen in place. The second man's words reverberated through me like a slap to the face. "You didn't tell him, did you?" I couldn't see Claire anymore. She was in the kitchen, but I could hear her footsteps, the faint sound of a drawer opening and closing. It was like the world had slowed down. I stood in that doorway, heart hammering, barely able to process what was unfolding in front of me. The first man, Lucas, didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the second man with a mix of guilt and something else, something dark. The room felt charged with tension, and I wanted to bolt out of there, to run and never look back, but I couldn't. I couldn't leave without knowing what was really going on. I took a step closer, just a tiny movement, hoping to hear more. The second man's voice broke the silence again. "You need to tell him. It's time." At this point, I felt like I was suffocating. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just an affair. It was something much bigger. But what? What was this? My thoughts were spinning, and just as I was about to move closer, I heard Claire's voice. She was coming back into the room. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly ducked behind the doorframe, hoping she hadn't seen me. The two men didn't seem to notice. Claire walked back into the living room, her face soft and relaxed, like she hadn't just kissed another man or heard the words I had heard. Her eyes flicked to Lucas first, and then to the second man. Her smile faded, just for a second, but then she recovered. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice casual, as if this wasn't a moment of revelation, as if nothing had just been said. Lucas cleared his throat. "Yeah, just, we were talking." The second man didn't speak, but I could see the subtle way his eyes shifted. He wasn't happy about something, but I didn't know what. Claire didn't press further. She walked past them both and sat down on the couch, picking up a glass of wine she had left earlier. She took a sip, looking like everything was completely normal. I couldn't stay hidden forever. This was it. I needed to confront her. I had been standing there, listening to the conversation, watching the betrayal unfold, for too long. I couldn't let her pretend like everything was fine anymore. But just as I was about to make my move, the doorbell rang. It was like the universe was toying with me. The sound of the doorbell sliced through the tension in the room like a knife. It was like someone had just hit pause on everything. Claire looked up from her glass of wine, momentarily startled by the sound. She exchanged a quick glance with Lucas and the second man, her expression shifting in a way that I couldn't quite read. I barely had time to think. The last thing I wanted was for Claire to open that door and find me standing there, eavesdropping on her secret life. But before I could move, Claire stood up, smoothing her dress, and made her way toward the door. I held my breath, pressing myself into the shadowed corner of the hallway, hoping I wouldn't be noticed. Every muscle in my body was tense, coiled like a spring. The seconds felt like hours. When she opened the door, I couldn't see who was standing there, but I could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps. Claire's voice broke the silence. "Hey, you're early," she said, her tone light but strained. The man outside must have said something, because Claire's expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened slightly before she composed herself. "I thought we agreed on 8, she asked, her voice tight with barely concealed annoyance. At that moment, my heart nearly stopped. The voice outside was familiar, but I couldn't place it. I strained my ears to catch the words, but the sound of Claire's voice covered most of it. All I could hear was a low murmur, followed by Claire's soft, dismissive response. "I'll be right back," she said, closing the door a little too quickly behind her. I stayed frozen, listening as her footsteps receded down the hall, the door clicking shut softly behind her. The two men in the living room were still, not moving, and I could sense a kind of unease settling in the air. I felt like I was living in a dream, a nightmare, really, where everything was out of control. My world, my marriage, was slipping away, and I couldn't do anything but watch. I took a cautious step toward the living room, my heart thundering in my chest. I needed answers. I couldn't wait any longer. I peeked into the living room just in time to see Lucas and the second man speaking in low voices. The second man's back was turned to me, but I could see the tension in his posture. He was agitated, almost angry. Lucas, on the other hand, was calm, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. Something wasn't right. There was something about their interaction that felt like a secret being shared, something they didn't want anyone else to know. I stepped back, my head spinning. The pieces were starting to fit together in ways I wasn't ready to accept, and I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. Just then, the front door opened again, and Claire reappeared. Her face was different now, more guarded, and she moved quickly back toward the living room. Without thinking, I took a step forward. I didn't plan to confront her like this. I wasn't ready. But as Claire re-entered the living room, something in me snapped. The curtain had been pulled back just a little too far, and now I was standing on the edge, unable to look away. Claire smiled at the men, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as if she were playing a part in a performance that was becoming harder to fake. "Sorry about that. Someone was just early," she said, her voice still light, but now laced with an edge of discomfort. She didn't look at me. Not yet. I stood frozen, just outside the living room, hidden in the shadows of the hallway. But everything in me screamed for her to notice me, to look up, to see that I was there. I was done being invisible, done pretending I didn't know what was happening. The truth was here, wrapped in a package I wasn't sure I could even open. Lucas was the first to speak, his voice casual but carrying an underlying tension. It's fine. We were just talking, right? His words were directed at Claire, but his eyes darted to the man standing beside him. The second man. I still hadn't seen his face clearly enough to fully understand what role he played in this twisted little scene. Claire nodded, but she avoided eye contact with both of them, a small crease forming between her brows as she moved back to the couch, sitting down carefully. Her hand instinctively went to her glass of wine, but she didn't take a sip. She was stalling, and I could see the tension building in her body. I didn't wait any longer. I stepped into the living room, slowly, deliberately. My voice caught in my throat as I addressed her. So this is what you've been hiding, huh? Claire froze, her hand still hovering over the wine glass. The color drained from her face, and for the first time in a long time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The two men turned toward me, their eyes dark and unreadable. The second man, who I now recognized as someone much older, more authoritative, smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was knowing, almost mocking. "Didn't expect you to show up like this," he said, his tone calm, like he was addressing a situation he had already planned for. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice more forceful than I intended. I felt the rage simmering beneath my skin, but I tried to hold it in. I needed answers. "I'm someone who knows exactly what's been happening here," the man replied smoothly. "But that's not really the question, is it? The question is what you're going to do now." My head was spinning. What was he talking about? What did he mean by what you're going to do now? Claire stood up, finally, her eyes flicking between me and the two men. "Owen, please, just let me explain." But I wasn't sure I could even listen anymore. What could she possibly say that would make sense of this? That would make any of it okay? "I don't think there's anything left to explain," I said, my voice breaking. I could feel the distance between us now, thicker than any argument we'd ever had. This wasn't about communication anymore. It was about betrayal, about my wife, about Lucas, about this stranger who seemed to know everything. The second man's smile widened. "Oh, there's much more to explain, Owen. Much more than you think." I felt my stomach twist. What was he talking about? Claire's face softened, but there was a quiet desperation in her eyes now. She took a step toward me, but I didn't move. "I didn't want you to find out this way." "Then how did you want me to find out?" I snapped. "How, Claire? After how long? After how many lies?" "I never meant for it to happen like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I couldn't hear her anymore. I couldn't. The man spoke again, his voice cutting through my thoughts. "This is bigger than you think," he said, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't place. "It's been in motion for months. You were always meant to find out like this. You were never meant to be in the dark." I didn't know what to believe anymore. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter and tighter with every word that was spoken. The room felt suffocating, the weight of everything hanging in the air. The anger that had been boiling inside me threatened to burst, but I fought to keep my composure. What was this man talking about? What did he mean? You were never meant to be in the dark? Claire stood there, her hands trembling slightly as she took a step back, her eyes never leaving mine. I could see the guilt written all over her face, but there was something else too. Pain, regret. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but the words weren't coming. The second man, this stranger who seemed to know everything, watched us both for a moment, then sighed deeply. "Maybe this wasn't the way I should have done it," he muttered to himself. Then, his gaze shifted to me. "Owen, there's a bigger picture here. Something that goes beyond what you think you know." I could barely focus on his words. All I could think about was the betrayal. How Claire's actions had shattered my trust. How everything I thought I knew about our life together had crumbled in a single evening. "I'm not here to hurt you," the man continued, his voice calmer now, almost apologetic. "I'm here to help." That was the moment everything shifted. My mind couldn't make sense of it, but something in his tone made me pause. I glanced at Claire, searching her face for an answer. She was still silent, but there was something in her eyes now. Something that told me there was more to this than I understood. "Help? How could you possibly help?" I asked, my voice hoarse. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, about to fall into the unknown. "I can't give you all the answers right now," the man said, his gaze softening. But I can tell you that what Claire has been part of, it's not what you think. She's been doing something important, something bigger than just a simple affair. This situation goes deeper than personal betrayal. I was confused, lost in a sea of questions. But in that moment, I saw it. Claire's face, her vulnerability, the way she was looking at me as if she were pleading for me to understand. I never wanted you to find out like this, she said softly, her voice breaking. But Owen, this is about us. About a future we were never meant to have if I kept hiding it. I was part of something that I thought would protect our family. But I see now that I should have been honest with you from the start. The second man nodded, as if validating her words. This was never just about the affair. It's about a bigger plan. A way for both of you to see things clearly, to rebuild trust. It's about taking control of your future together in ways you didn't expect. For the first time that night, something clicked. The anger started to ebb, replaced by a deep sense of confusion, but also something else, hope. There was a part of me that still wanted to believe in Claire, in us. The path forward wasn't clear, but the possibility of rebuilding, of finding out the truth together, gave me something to hold on to. I looked at Claire, her eyes full of tears. What are you saying? That everything, all of this, was part of some bigger plan? She nodded slowly, stepping closer to me. Yes, but I don't expect you to understand it all now. What matters is that we face it, together. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of something. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the relief of finally knowing that things could be fixed. That there was a way forward. We'd made mistakes, we'd hurt each other, but it wasn't too late. I'm scared, I whispered, more to myself than to her. I know, Claire said, her voice soft. But we can fix this. We'll face everything together. I promise. The man in the room watched us for a moment, then nodded. It's time to move forward. Don't let the past hold you back. And with that, the tension in the room began to lift. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but for the first time that night, I saw a way forward. A chance to rebuild. The truth had come crashing down on me in the most unexpected way, but in the end, it was the truth that would set us free. As Claire reached out to take my hand, I felt something inside me begin to heal, one small piece at a time. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. The end of one chapter, and the start of another. Together.